I found this Spokeshave at an estate sale last year. I'm attracted to any vintage tool made out of steel, wood, and brass. The blade came off pretty easily. The brass knobs appeared to be captive. I used a pick to clean out the slotted screw heads. The screws didn't put up much of a fight. I soaked the blade and the screws in Evaporust. Here's the metal parts after soaking in Evaporust. I put the screws into a scrap board with the help of my Yankee number 45 push drill. This made it easier to clean up the screw heads. Chuck and I even flitzed them while they were in the board. I wanted to get the face of the blade looking a little better, so I started off with the 80 grit belt on my 1x30 sander. After sanding down to 120 grit, I switched to the Red Label conditioning belts. I got it pretty shiny, but the pits were way too deep to sand out. Look how thin the blade is. I used a sanding drum in my Dremel to sharpen the curved blade. I recommend you go watch Paul Sellers to see how to do this properly. I decided to give rust bluing another try with a different rusting solution recipe. I combined 4 tablespoons hydrogen peroxide with 1 tablespoon white vinegar. I warmed it up in the microwave to help dissolve 3/4 teaspoon kosher salt into the solution. Check out how the metal starts to rust right away. I used Mrs. Magdad's hairdryer to speed up the process. I then submerged the part in boiling distilled water. The red rust turns into a black protective finish. I dried it off and buffed it with steel wool. Then I degreased and coated it again with the rusting solution. Here it is going into the boiling water for a second time. And buffing it with steel wool a second time. This is the finish I achieved after 8 treatments. I was happy with the even color. I think the new rusting solution recipe is an improvement. I coated the blade with oil and let it soak while I worked on the wood and the brass. I used a pocket knife to scrape off the old wood finish. I find that scraping saves me clogging up sandpaper with wax and varnish. I started off with 120 grit on the handle. I noticed what looked like a maker's mark while sanding. It looked like 2 letters inside a triangle. After sanding with 220 grit, the marking became more distinct. It definitely looked like a W and a J inside the triangle. The handle was really smooth after sanding with 320. I wish we had Feel-O-Vision. I finished the wood with Watco Danish oil. Okay, on to the brass. Check out all of the green crusty stuff. The green stuff scraped off pretty easily. I used some steel wool and a drill bit to clean out the screw holes. The brass was pretty roughly finished, so I started sanding with 150 grit. Then 240 grit. then 320, 400 grit, remember, it's a process, and finally 600 grit. I used some superfine Scotch-Brite to blend the sanding marks. Chuck was ready for the next step.
Ah! That's it!
Chuck and I love polishing brass. Here's what the Spokeshave looked like when I brought it home from the estate sale. I think it turned out pretty well. It's always a pleasure to work on vintage tools made of steel, wood, and brass. I decided to give axe wax a try on this project. You're supposed to warm up the wood a little before applying. It was cold in my basement shop, so I also warmed up the wax. I've used this stuff a few times now, though admittedly not on axes. I have to say, I prefer my Johnson's paste wax. Okay, let's see how this thing works. This is a piece of scrap pine. Looks like it's doing the job. My research suggests that my Spokeshave was likely made by the William Johnson Company out of the Hedenberg Works in Newark, New Jersey. The company began in the mid-1800s and was finally sold off in 1958. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.